Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are zooming in from. Welcome to today's webinar, Connecting SEL to Support Academic Success. And this is brought to you by Harmony Academy at National University. This is a monthly webinar series that brings together thought leaders in education to inspire best teaching practices and support social emotional learning for educators as well as your students. The opinions and content in today's presentation are that of our featured guests and may not necessarily be a direct representation of Harmony. This webinar is being recorded and you will receive a recorded version to view again. And please feel free to share that with your colleagues. My name is Marie Weller, and I'm a professional learning specialist at the Harmony Academy. And I am excited about moderating today's session and also learning alongside all of you. So let's take a look at what we will be learning. Today we'll be taking a look at the research and science and the interconnectedness of social emotional development and academics. We'll be hearing how schools around the country are using relationship-driven strategies to support their students' academic success. And we will be discovering strategies, social emotional programs, and practices that support that success. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get this party started. It is an honor for me to introduce our host for today's fireside chat, the esteemed researcher and author, Dr. Douglas Fisher. Dr. Fisher is a professor of educational leadership at San Diego State University. He's a teacher leader at Health Sciences High and Middle School, which is an award-winning and open enrollment public school that he co-founded in 2007. It's located in the City Heights neighborhood of San Diego. His professional interests include instructional design, curriculum development, professional learning, and he has published over 250 books, chapters, and articles focused on school improvement. Also, he was recently elected into the Reading Hall of Fame in 2022. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Fisher.
Thank you, everybody. And I get to introduce some amazing colleagues who've had great impact on our profession. First is Dr. Cristina Cipriano. She is Director of the Education Collaboratory at Yale University. Her research focuses on the systematic examination of SEL and assessment interventions with marginalized students and teacher populations. Dr. Cipriano has extensive experience working in classrooms and schools, providing trainings to teachers and support staff, and direct instruction to students. She's a national expert in SEL and is the PI and director of numerous major federal and foundation grants supporting the development and validation of novel SEL assessments, observation practices, and SEL evaluation and efficacy trials. We'll hear from her in just a moment. I'm also joined today by Dr. Deborah Bergeron, who's the Deputy Director of Community Engagement and Innovation at National Head Start Association. Dr. Deborah Bergeron is the former director of the Office of Early Childhood Development and also represented the Office of Head Start as its director. She spent 3 decades in pre-K to 12 public education as a classroom teacher and school administrator. And my third colleague and friend, Allison Yoshimano-Tauri, the executive director of the CSU UC Collaborative for Neuroscience, Diversity, and Learning. You see what I did, Allison? Allison has been an educator and administrator in Los Angeles Unified School District, the second largest school system in the United States, for 3 decades. Her current role is the executive director of the CSU UC Collaborative, where she oversees and coordinates the statewide hub of activities and resources for developing researchers, UC and CSU teacher education programs, and partnering with schools and districts to advance learning for neurodiverse students. In 2022, our governor in our great state appointed Allison as a member of the California State Board of Education. Wow, What an impressive group of people with different experiences to share their thinking with us. Now, I get to turn it over to our first speaker, Dr. Cipriano, and her interest in this cool meta-analysis and study that you did. Thanks for being here and thanks for sharing. Dr. Cipriano, we're not hearing you right now.
So sorry about that.
There
Thank
you
you so
go.
much for having me here today. It's an honor to be here with you all to get to share just a couple of minutes on my passion and our project work. I just wanted to elevate, you see on the screen there, I am the director of the Education Collaboratory at Yale, where we are working to advance the science and practice of social emotional learning. And I'm going to give you a couple of hints on what that looks like through working through some of our research today. Over the course of the next couple of minutes, you'll see a QR code on your screen. You can go ahead and scan that to learn more about our respective work and our science as I'm sharing it. It does not appear that my slides are advancing. Okay, so just to briefly ground us in what is social emotional learning, remember nothing from our time together today. Remember that it is an interrelated set of cognitive, affective, and behavioral skills and strategies that underscore how we learn, how we grow, how we form relationships, the ways in which our identity is manifesting in its interactions in our world. It's our ability to be healthy, physically and psychologically. It's not one thing, and certainly not one program. Now, the study that I want to share with you all today is a brand new registered report that came out this year in Child Development, the State of the Evidence of Social Emotional Learning. We looked at over 400 studies of SEL, representing more than 240 specific and discrete SEL programs, more than 500,000 K-12 students, representing over 53 countries and 13 years of evidence to really unpack the for, who, how, and why of social emotional learning. And if you look in that QR code in the corner there of your screen, you can go ahead and scan that to get access to the full paper and all of the data. So what did we learn? Thank you so much for advancing those slides. First, social emotional learning supports all students to thrive. If you look at that overall number in the top right-hand corner of 0.194 with the 3 little asterisks against it, that means an overall significance of a 3-level hierarchical model. You put everything that people call SEL into the pot contemporarily, and you use our analytic methods to strain that out, and we find an overall significant effect of how students are performing in school. And not just an overall effect, but we found significance of 9 of our 12 domains. So let me tell you a little bit about what those mean. Please advance. So first, students who participate in social emotional learning do better in school. People are really concerned about and interested in what's the impact of SEL with academic achievement, and we found overwhelming, robust evidence of the effectiveness of SEL linking to students' academic achievement. But we also looked at school functioning, which means we saw increases in homework completion, attendance, on-task behavior, engagement in learning, as well as social emotional learning skills and attitudes. Please advance. In addition, students who participate in SEL have healthier behaviors at school. So increased pro-sociality in their engagement with their peers, as well as increased in civic attitudes and behaviors, and thinking about how they're participating and engaging in the democratic process, as well as a reduction in aggression and bullying. Please advance. Also, students who participate in SEL feel better. Reductions in anxiety, stress, less presentations of depressive symptoms, and less suicidality. I don't need to tell everyone on this call what we have going on in our country right now and the state of social emotional health and need of our students. Could there possibly be not a more important finding than us being able to think about and understand the intersection of SEL and how our students are engaging social emotionally? Please advance. And lastly, our set of effects found that students who participate in SEL programs feel safer at school. The largest effect size that we found across all evidence was the perceptions of school climate and safety. What does that mean? That's more connected, more included, less bullying and victimization, overall better school climate, and kids were having better relationships with their peers and with their teachers. So an overwhelming amount of evidence there. Now, from promising practices to policy implications, some of the more discrete findings that we draw your attention to. 1, programs delivered by teachers had the strongest effects. Please advance. So this shows us that we need to be investing in adult development, how we're training our teachers. Secondly, we found that programs that are sequence, active, focused, and explicit or safe programs produce stronger effects for students. as well as that it's not just any order of a program, but actually if you teach emotion skills before social skills, you produce more positive effects. And when we look at the breadth versus depth of SEL programs, if you do the whole continuum of what could be SEL versus just one kind of discrete category there within, programs that covered the breadth produce stronger effects for students than those that went into in-depth. And so we encourage folks to be really investing in programs that are sequenced, organized, and comprehensive. And then lastly, we found evidence that SEL benefits every age group. And so this idea that, there's no such thing as emotions in adolescence and emotions don't have a place in high school is really unfounded. And we have now more stronger scientific evidence than we ever had before of thinking about how we can help to promote states to have secondary school state standards of the importance of effective science in their classrooms. Please advance. You can go ahead to the next slide. I know that I'm running short on time, so I'm going to ask you to just scroll through there quickly for a number of critical opportunities to consider, including the investments in family and community within social emotional learning, the ways in which we are really thinking about and focusing on the adults who are facilitating the programming. Please keep going down those slides there. We want to be explicit about the integration of SEL into academics. Only about 17% of our sample actually gave us academic outcomes, so we actually imagine that effect size to be quite larger. And we were hoping to see more tiered content in SEL and an increased specificity on how people talk about SEL, which Dr. Fisher, if we have some time, I'd love to answer some more questions on. And if you continue on with that scroll, you can learn more about our lab science and some of these very recent papers that have come out over the past year and on the horizon, as well as that QR code. And thank you very much for the opportunity to share just a tiny little snapshot of the work that we've been doing right now in SEL.
And I will have lots of questions after all the presenters talk, because I want you to talk more. And you had me at effect size. I love effect sizes. I love that you were able to do that and communicate across a bunch of studies how powerful it is for each of those. Allison, welcome. Great to see you. You're going to talk about space and time and educational systems to support the whole child. We're so happy you're here. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Fisher. I'm also so excited about what Dr. Cipriano shared. In our work at the UC-CSU Collaborative, we're really focused on how do we support not only in-service, what's happening in school districts, but also what's happening in pre-service and inform policy to support what's happening in both of those realms. So I call it the 3 Ps: practitioners, policy, and pre-service. And we really want to focus on a mission that just transforms our educational systems so that every young person can really thrive in school and in life. So with my other hat, although I'm not speaking as a state board member today, I did want to share some of the work that's happening in California at the state level regarding our community school efforts, because as Dr. Cipriano shared, it's not just what happens with an individual child or within individual classrooms, it's how we're supporting our families, our communities, it's also how we're supporting our school systems and the entire infrastructure to be able to do this work well. So in California, the legislature has appropriated $4.1 billion. I'll say it one more time, $4.1 billion through 2031 to focus on building community schools where it really is about the whole child as an improvement strategy, where there's shared decision making with educators, students, and families, and also schools are as the center and the hub of the community, are working with local education, local community agencies and government to really align resources and provide services at school sites where our students are every day and where there's trust. On the next slide, if you could please advance for me. Thank you. The state has divided itself into 8 regional support centers and 1 statewide transformational assistance center. And what's really unique about our state transformational assistance center is that it has 4 entities that are working together to lead that, including the Alameda County Office of Education. We have the UCLA School Center for Community Schooling, Californians for Justice, and National Education Association, together modeling that shared decision making, and then supporting the 8 regional technical assistance centers that are then supporting the county offices and the school sites. On the next slide, you'll see, I wanted to introduce very briefly, and again, will be available for questioning, what we call 4x4 framework. And again, think about it systemically. There are 4 pillars of a community school that include those integrated student supports, what we think about as wraparound student supports, family engagement in a way where it's not one way, where we're talking to families and community engagement, but we're also listening and really building those relationships and thinking about the assets that our families and our communities bring, and collaborative leadership practices for people in any seat in the school. And then what does the day look like before school and after school and on weekends to really support that engagement of both students and community. And so I call it 4x4 because there's 4 of these areas. The next 4 is key conditions for learning. And here we really think about how do we strengthen our core instructional programs in a multi-tiered system of support focused on what we call the science of learning and development. And again, around the whole child, what are not just, you know, if I'm focused on teaching reading, I might know the number of phonemes in the English language, but what is my supportive environmental condition? What kinds of engagement strategies am I using? How are we teaching, not only directly instructing on social emotional learning, but when are opportunities for students to practice that? And what are the systems of supports that are allowing us to do that? And then the third area where we have 4 items is what we call cornerstone commitments. And these are what we believe community schools are believe in and are committed to improving, which is assets-based, assets-driven practice. So not just looking at the deficits, right, which is so easy to do traditionally, but thinking about from a different lens, what are all the assets that we have in our community, in our classrooms? What are, we do not want race, community, zip code to define our student outcomes. So how do we bring restorative practices into our schools and create climates where everybody feels safe and a sense of belonging? And then how do we think about instruction in a way that's culturally proficient and relevant to the students that we serve? And of course, those shared decision making and participatory practices. And then the 4th area, very briefly, is if you could advance. Thank you, are the 4 proven practices. And these are literally practices that we're asking schools in the community school effort to employ, which would be think about how do you first assess all of the assets, I'll say the strengths in the community, and then take a look at where are those areas that we need to fill and booster. We do our funding community school coordinators in each of our community schools to do this work of coordinating so that it doesn't all fall to one person, such as the principal, to do the coordination. And then really thinking about what is the shared decision-making advisory there, and then how do we integrate and align not only our programs, but also our funding, such as our after-school funding, our funding for educator effectiveness, to really think about what does that school single plan look like, or that LCAP for the school. And so again, we'll be available for questions later, and thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Allison, and welcome, Deborah. And I can't wait. I know you've done a lot of other things in your life and work, but I'm super excited around the Head Start connection in the early childhood. And thank you for joining us and helping us think about those kids as well.
I'm so excited to be here. I don't know if I have screen control. I'm going to give this a shot. Let's see. I don't think so. You want to advance my slide for me? Great. So I was asked to join this conversation about SEL, and I thought the best thing that I could do was to give folks a perspective about Head Start and its place in our modern prioritization of SEL. And it's wonderful for me to be following the previous 2 speakers, because both are really setting up what I'm going to share with you today about how Head Start is rooted in SEL and has been before SEL was really an acronym. And I think it's good to understand that so that you can have, first of all, access to some resources that I'll share with you. And then maybe a next action step that could be really exciting. All right, next slide. I thought I would just let you know first, I'm here from the National Head Start Association, and our real goal is to make sure that Head Start has a powerful voice in the nation, It is nonpartisan, and it's all about building healthier, empowered children and families, which connects a lot to what Allison was talking about. So it's very exciting to hear her talking about the incredible work California's doing around community schools, which when I was at the Office of Head Start, I met with their leadership about, and it's just an incredibly comprehensive way of approaching K-12. It's very exciting. Next slide. And Head Start itself, you may be familiar with it, but just in case, I thought I would just share with you. Its primary goal is to promote school readiness of low-income children by enhancing their cognitive, social, and emotional development. I mean, that's in a nutshell the justification for funding Head Start. It is very comprehensive. Certainly the family is a huge part of that. And written right here in the Act is the learning environment that supports children's growth in language, literacy, math, science, social emotional functioning is written very, very explicitly. And is one of the requirements that programs have from the federal government, and they're monitored on it. And I think that's a really important thing to consider as we're talking today about the value of SEL, which Dr. Cipriano's research clearly shows, and then how that can work in a comprehensive system like California's. Next slide. So I thought what I would do is take the early learning outcomes framework, which is Head Start, the Office of Head Start's framework around learning, and just show you how this national program, and this is not brand new, puts social and emotional development right there in the central domains of the early learning outcomes framework. And this is the framework that every Head Start program uses to craft its day-to-day engagement with academic and with curriculum across the board, the academic, the reading and math, like we were talking about earlier, and then really focusing on this idea of social emotional development. Next slide. And you see in the approaches for learning, now this is from the Office of Head Start's website, an important part of becoming a successful learner, can you go back, thank you, is developing the ability to self-regulate in a variety of situations. So self-regulation is a huge part of what we're working on in Head Start. And as you know, it's birth to 5. So it's where those skills really become rooted in a child's day-to-day navigation of their learning. Next slide. And then the big piece of this framework is the social emotional development. Positive social emotional development in early years provides a critical foundation for lifelong learning. This is right from the Office of Head Start. So it's relationships with adults, with other children, emotional functioning, and a sense of identity and belonging. And I point this out to you to simply recognize that a program that has been around for almost 6 decades is rooted in this kind of priority when it comes to working with young children and their families. Next slide. And then I think this is a really important way for me to end what I'm talking about, because these dots on this map represent Head Starts across the country. And the beautiful thing about Head Start, it's a federal to local program. So in essence, I could click on a dot and I can call that program directly. It's that networked throughout the nation. So whoever you are out there on this webinar, you have the opportunity in whatever role you're playing in the K-12 environment to connect with your Head Start programs and collaborate around how we are integrating SEL through graduation. And Head Start programs are uniquely poised to support this process because it is an absolute essential part of the program. There are resources on the Office of Head Start's website, and I can share that in the chat with you in just a minute, that are free to you to look to use. There's everything from training videos to white papers to activities that you can share with teachers, and these are great starting points. And of course, policy. If you're developing policy, there can be support around policy there. And I think sometimes Head Start exists kind of under the radar, and a lot of folks aren't aware that this is the program's there in your neighborhood, and the resources within are available to you. So I encourage you to, that's your action step, to see if you can make use of some of these incredible resources around SEL that are out there just waiting to be used. And that's it.
Awesome, thank you. So now we get to have a bit of a chat. And so I'd love to all of our colleagues, I'm gonna ask a bunch of questions. I also have some questions that are coming to me that we'll add for you all. So the first question is, your interpretation. You each presented your interpretation of social, emotional, academic learning. Do you think there's consensus on this in our field? Do you think people generally agree, like, this is what we mean when we say social, emotional, and academic learning? Alison, I'm going to start with you as the former leader of a very large school system and now the executive director of this large collaboration between two huge university systems.
Thank you. It's a good question. I don't think we necessarily have consensus, particularly in this day and age in our country. There's a lot of different opinions about just about everything, but I think it is important to define that. It's also important. So in my former district, what we did is we took time to really build out definitions for what we believed was social emotional learning, and then also sort of a course sequence of like how we would see a student developing the competencies of social emotional learning so that teachers could help gauge and build. And then I think it's important also to think about in practice as an educator to always be reflective of our own beliefs, our own assumptions, our own biases as we work with our students in our communities, because there are different ways to exhibit proficiency in the competencies that may not be a match exactly to my own, but we have to be open-minded about that.
Awesome. Dr. Cipriano, how would you respond? And then Dr. Bergeron, I'll put it up to you in a moment. Then I'll ask them another question.
Absolutely. So, prior to our meta-analysis being completed, there was 136 SEL frameworks that were in circulation, and it was over 700 skills and strategies were documented. We documented over 4,000 in our most recent review. And it's not to say that we aren't all talking about the same thing, but the language and the words that we use can vary very widely. We use the term heterogeneous. It's a heterogeneous construct and field. And so I don't necessarily think that people are like fundamentally disagreeing on the what of SEL, but the words and terminology that they're using have slightly different nuance to them, that some come from different cultural expectations and considerations and different schools of thought that can lead to diversity in expectation of what would be the outcome from the SEL. And so like in terms of where you'd like to see that skill kind of play out in a child's life, I think we're see much more likelihood of differentiation at that stage in the process. And I'll turn it over to Deborah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can't shake my head hard enough on that one. That's exactly what I was going to say. I think some of it is semantics and language, and some of that is cultural perspective, and some of it is sort of a blatant use of charged language in our media that tries to get people all excited that if you just have a conversation with them. And Allison, I think about the work you're doing with families and the work Head Start does in such a diverse group. You have to educate people. They have to understand everybody doesn't come with a child to pre-K and an ECE doctorate to know all the lingo that we're using. They just know what they know. And so part of our responsibility is to sit folks down and take the time and engage with them, because nothing that's, for example, in the Head Start early learning's outcome framework, no, there isn't a parent who wouldn't want their child to engage in that way and to grow in that way. But when we frame it in a way that's charged and divisive, we create a lot of resistance. So, and that's really tough to manage, especially today with media being so accessible to everybody. But I think about the programs that they're doing in California around family engagement, and that's where it happens. It's when you're sitting down and talking and developing relationships, and then you can share data like you have, Christina, and show folks what we're seeing. And I think most parents would embrace it.
Beautiful. So we're thinking about relationship strategies. So how do we develop these relationship strategies? And so I'm wondering about what insights you would have about the relationship or the connection between relationship strategies and academic success. So I'm going to start with you, Dr. Cipriano, since you've been studying this. And what is the evidence telling us about the relationship, the connection between good relationship strategies and academic success?
Absolutely. It's a great question. And I want to start by saying there's no technology that is going to replace a trusted adult for every student in every school and classroom around our country. So we really want to be very careful about how we're introducing technology in that regard with all of the new ways in which it can be implemented in the classroom. So what happens when you have a strong relationship in a classroom? A student feels seen, valued and heard, they have a connection so that they are safe and available to learn, right? So from a cognitive effective standpoint, those are interconnected. That student is more susceptible to taking risk, open to learning, asking questions, informing healthy inquiry in ways that will promote their positive outcomes. And where will we see that? We'll see that social emotionally, but you'll also see that in those academic skills, in those academic achievement scores, proximally and distally. And I gave you like the tiniest little top of the iceberg for 5 minutes, but we could spend hours going through the data that we collected and showing that trajectory in the short and long term for kids as they go across their school community. So when we think about relationships, we want to focus on the connections and the inclusiveness and how they're able to be seen and safe to learn in school. And that comes from both their peers and their teachers. And having those relationships are going to help them to be more available to show up in their academics.
Awesome. Dr. Bergeron, how would you add or contribute to that conversation about relationships, especially with our youngest kids, forming those relationships and then their academic success?
Absolutely. I think I would just highlight everything Christina just said. I mean, I think that the key and the word trust to me is at the very center. I think that we talk a lot here in our professional development with Head Start teachers and leadership that it's the trust building with children that allows them to open up and lean into learning. And that's true if you're 3 or if you're 13. It really doesn't change. It changes maybe the way you develop the relationship and not the outcome. So I really think that is vital. And with young children, it's as much about building trusting relationships with their parents as it is with them. When they observe that linkage between teacher and parent, they see that and respond in a way that helps them to engage with learning in a whole different way. And actually, I would even say that would still be true in middle school or in high school. When kids see their parents on the same team and engaging in trusting relationships with educators, the kids are far more likely to lean into the learning and to open themselves up and grapple with tough stuff. Like, it's not all easy. So what am I going to do when it's difficult? And it's just easier to embrace that when those relationships are strong.
Awesome. Allison, and maybe Allison, if you want to go into adding on around some of the neurodiverse learners that as part of what your work is, and then, broadly defined to how you're thinking about this systems leader and advocate.
Sure, thank you. I would build on what both my colleagues have said. I think that whether you're 3, 13 or 33 or 53, like, we want that safe, trusting, I feel seen, I feel heard, I feel like I belong here. And it's really important from a systems level that our grown-ups feel in our systems, that they have opportunities to be brave, to be courageous, to be vulnerable, to have a trusting space where they can reflect on their instruction and think about how we can do this work well. And I also think that I'll reference a different kind of data, which is from talking to hundreds and thousands of young people, we know that they feel that that's important. And so as we think about school climate surveys and being able to ask young people how they feel about school, do they have that one trusted person at school? Do they feel safe walking to and from school? Do they feel like they belong, like they're listened to? That those kind of data are really important as well. Thinking about how do we uplift the voice of the people we serve the most in this work as we go forward.
Beautiful. You've all talked a little bit about belonging, and I wonder if you want to venture into that. Any of you want to venture into this idea of belonging as part of the competencies? That's been on my mind as you all three were talking about it, and Jeff Cohen's Stanford work on belonging, and just things that I keep thinking about, because you all have ventured into this. As we develop relationships, we build the sense of belonging. So I don't know which of you was interested in taking that direction. I see Christina's ready to go.
I'll just kind of add into, I love this, I love all of this. When we look at the work of Rob Yeagers and colleagues and the transformative SEL framework, or TSEL, as people have been calling it since 2019, belonging is one of the kind of elaborative competencies within that broader framework of kind of helping to create the conditions so that all students can feel that sense of belonging, and that comes through the ways in which their identity, particularly their cultural identity, is affirmed in their growth of their social emotional skills. So one kind of important kind of piece there to add into the science. I think a second point to just call out the elephant that we're all talking around in the room here is the current socio-political climate and the divisiveness there within, and knowing that there are many different types of identities that children and youth and adults bring into spaces that are being given really clear, loud signals right now that you don't belong here, or it's not safe for you to be here. And so, we have an opportunity within the broader education landscape and social emotional learning to create those conditions where all children and adults are safe to learn and thrive in school. And I see that as a very hopeful pathway forward, but recognizing that this is a real-time problem for us in the US right now in terms of what's happening in classrooms and communities across the country.
Anyone else want to comment on belonging? Yeah, Deborah.
Yeah, I think I always, this is like a go-to for me, because Head Start is so focused on the whole child, which is really the family. So the mantra is a parent's a child's first and most important teacher in Head Start. And that's true really forever. And I think about the value of creating belonging for parents and families in the school process, and sincere belonging, as Allison said, not just an reach out. We're going to reach out to you, but we're actually going to see you as a valuable part of the process. And I would argue that there is so much potential in that one piece that would be a game changer for the way schools operate, for the way children engage during the day, and for the way that the work gets done, because of that strong relationship with parents and their feeling that the school is that they are part of that. I sometimes wonder, I'm a pre, during, and post NCLB educator. So like started in NCLB, wasn't on the radar. And then here we were with this, get the test scores. And so what we did inadvertently really is separate parents from the process, because we weren't going to use a child's background as a reason they couldn't be successful. But instead of inviting the parents in to solve the problem, at least in my experience, it was more like, okay, don't point outward. It's not the parents' fault. You can solve this here. But what that did was separate parents from their child's learning experiences. And it was unintentional, I'm sure, but I do think that that's a pretty severe issue. And there isn't that sense of belonging, especially for parents who are in communities that are struggling. They definitely feel far less comfortable in school systems than they should.
Awesome.
Thank you both for saying that. I think we're all in a sense talking about how do we build that school-wide culture, the practices at a school site, at a district level, because when we're engaging in true authentic partnerships, we have opportunities to revisit how we think about things like school discipline, and whether we're engaging in exclusionary practices or exclusionary discipline practices that in some cases could be considered an adverse childhood experience in and of themselves. And so really thinking about it from a system level, how might we think differently about our practices so that we are actually aligned with what we want to achieve in school?
Yeah, awesome. So what strategies or approaches could educators use to advocate for the importance of relationship learning within their systems? How can you champion this issue if you're a teacher, a leader, community member, parent? How do you do that work? So Deborah, can I start with you on this? How could you help? What advice do you have for educators to advocate for the importance of relationship learning?
So part of what I have done, I do a lot of work with educators around trust and trust in the classroom. And a lot of times they will share with me they're not in a building that's going to embrace that kind of approach, the one that we're talking about. And I really am a true believer that you can do this from the inside out. So if a classroom teacher embraces relationship building and trust building with children, people are going to ask him or her, what are you doing? Because none of your kids are getting sent to the office. Your kids are achieving, or things will just work so much better that people will wonder. And so I have helped folks by, from the inside out, building that ability to take it into the classroom. And I mean, it can be curriculum based, but it doesn't have to be. Some of what we're talking about is basic behavior and interactions with children and families. And as you build those trust relationships and you start to see the classroom hum more, and it's less difficult and teaching is fun, people will come and say, what are you doing? And then sometimes just organically, you can sort of grow that culture. But at the end of the day, if you're talking about systems, if you don't have buy-in from that building principal in terms of building a culture that is relationship driven, it's great in the classroom. You can still do it, but it is really, really a heavy lift, because the principal really is the keeper of the keys on how the building feels when people walk through it. And from your custodian to your cafeteria folks to your front office, not just teachers, but everyone who's engaging with kids throughout the day.
Yeah, that school climate, the way it feels and the things we do, super important. And I appreciate you saying the power of the site administrators in establishing, maintaining, building, and repairing that climate. Thank you. Allison, you've done a lot of work in that area with, what, 7,000 schools or something in Los Angeles Unified. I don't know how many you all had. But now thinking about it at the system level, state board member, kind of what's your thinking on that question?
Tell me the question again, Doug.
Sure. How do we help educators advocate for the importance of relationship learning within their systems? And how do we support them as they think about, how do I incorporate relationship learning into my building, my classroom, etc.?
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I was on target with that.
Yeah.
So I really think it goes back to this conversation about, if we want to be really targeted, like, when in the day do I do that? When in the week do I do that? When in the month does this happen? And so with our schools, we really had focused on, like, looking even as specific as master scheduling and the time, in an elementary school, in an elementary setting, like, what are we doing school wide? What are those practices? What are those times in the day where we're focusing on relationship building? How are we doing that collectively, so that young people know, when I go from classroom to classroom, these are things I should expect. When I go from the classroom to the yard, to the cafeteria, these are things I should expect, rather than saying, oh, it's different here, or different when I go to this place, or different when I go to this place on campus. What can I expect as a student at a particular school that is collective? And then I think in the secondary level, really looking closely at things like advisory, how schools use advisory, homeroom. Some schools have added a 7th period or an 8th period to really think about more time in the day for that relationship building. Some schools have done coring in middle school, where we really think about that relationship building. So you're not going from 5th grade where you have 1 teacher to 6th grade where you have 6 teachers or 7 teachers, but rather you have the same teacher for English and for history, for example, or math and science, for example. So again, building those small schools or those ideas around coring. And again, I think it goes to, again, you can do this in the classroom on your own. I really build that community, but when I look at it from the journey of a student, I want to know, what is it like for me throughout my school day and throughout my school years?
Awesome. Thank you. Dr. Cipriano.
So I want to lift up a couple of things that my colleagues just shared to kind of move us forward with what you can do. So Allison, I heard you bringing up the idea of shared language, expectations, routine, to help to build that culture so that all kids are feeling kind of seen and heard and have the opportunity to form those healthy relationships. And then Deborah, I heard you say before that, like, really thinking about all of the adults in the school community, right? You were naming out those education support professionals and all the different roles that the adults play, that we all can serve as educators, and we can, each one of us in our micro small interactions with our students, be the ones who are helping to form those healthy relationships and modeling that shared language and expectations and routines in ways that are continuous, whether or not it's like circle time or advisory or not. So as kind of an ask or a plug thereafter. We also know that education support professionals make up 1/3 of the education workforce in the US, and they are most likely to look like the students and live in the communities with which a school is housed. And so when thinking about opportunities for cultural, racial, linguistic connection, our education support professionals in concert with our teachers and our leaders play an important role. And then lastly, that role of the leader in helping to move that forward. We can't stress enough the importance of what that leader can do or not do, right, in a given setting, and how they can kind of, support the advancement of initiatives and continuation of language, as well as kind of squash it, right? And kind of we've seen really good programs go awry as a result of leadership that was not matched to the needs of the community. And so some recommendations that my lab and our team and our work with some of our partners, we have a chapter that came out in a book called SEL in Action this past spring that's really geared towards districts and communities and thinking about SEL. And in that chapter, we walk through a model, we call it a collaboratory for inclusion, and we ask questions. We give you some questions to kind of guide you. So I just kind of share a few of those in light of it. So who are 5 students in your school community or in your classroom, if you're not the leader, who need SEL to work most for them? Who are the 5 adults who are most proximal to those 5 students? Do they have what they need? Are you one of those adults? Do you have what you need to support those students, and how? And then we kind of go through kind of a list of, here's some ways to check, some opportunities, some access points, and I'm happy to share and follow up kind of a direct link so you can access that content in front of a paywall. So just a few thoughts to kind of share to tie it together. For sure.
Thank you. And then for me, the big question is, what practices, initiatives, activities, strategies have you observed or been part of that show promise in yielding significant benefits for kids in terms of social emotional development? So Dr. Cipriano, we'll start with you because you did the meta-analysis, and then I'll ask my colleagues, what initiatives, practices, strategies are out there that you think have very good return on investment?
Oh goodness, gosh, we could talk about this one for a few hours. So sequence, active, focused, explicit programs do better. Programs that are classroom-based and facilitated by teachers are better. We actually saw that the strongest effects are when programs are organized in a way that they are kind of shorter in duration. So as opposed to having programs that are like, it takes you 2 years to get towards that point or that larger outcome of expectation, thinking about how that can operate within a 4-month or 6-month window and supporting students to really see their proximal effects and change and building that skill development, all kind of implementation science standpoints that we have really strong evidence to stand on now from a statistical standpoint of like what that looks like and does and how it works. But I can't stress enough that I'm talking there about programs, but much of which we were discussing in our conversations here today have been more the kind of kernels or the teaching strategies that educators are engaging in. And so really thinking about how we speak to our students, what is the social emotional teaching that's happening, whether or not it's at circle time or advisory, right? It's really actually during all those other times, and how those micro interactions form those healthy relationships and support positive development.
Excellent. Allison.
Sure. So I want to make a connection here to how we think about teaching of English, because in English language development, we have a time of the day where there's direct instruction, and then we have a time of the day where it's integrated into all other subject areas. And so right now, what Christina said about, you can do things within Circle or within advisory, but there's also other times in the day. And so I think about SEL in a similar way, that there are times where we do direct instruction on SEL competencies. There's a focused curricula, there's time and effort directly focused on that. But then there's times in the day when we're actually implementing and practicing and modeling all of the competencies throughout the other curricular, areas. And I think that has really big implications for how we conduct professional development. It's unfair to the teacher in the classroom for us to teach, come to a professional development on SEL, but not talk about anything else, and then come to a professional development on literacy. Now come to a separate professional development on how to teach English learners, and come to a separate professional development on how to do restorative justice. And then we leave it all up to the principals and the teachers to figure out how to do that. And so I think it really is an opportunity for us right now to think about how do we conduct professional adult learning in a way that actually helps people integrate that together in practice as close to the school site classroom as possible. And many opportunities for that practice and that reflection.
Awesome. And Deborah?
Yeah, I think what I'll bring to this question is just that early learning lens and how, you know, the world of early learning, Head Start in particular, is a great foundation upon which to build all of this, because it has been part of that equation for a really, really long time. And so there's a lot that we can learn from our early learning programs and from our professionals in that space. And so I'm going to point to Long Beach Unified because I'm part of the early learning cohort at AASA, the Superintendent's Association, and they were just out in California visiting Long Beach. And I wasn't able to go, but they were so excited to share that they do this holistic integrated early learning system that brings everybody together. And the connection I'm going to make is if we could see our school systems seeing themselves as part of that early learning community, not overpowering them, but truly working together to learn from what early learning brings to the table. What I think we will see happen organically, which is what Long Beach is experiencing, and probably other school systems in California because of the way they're operating, is that then that trickles up. The SEL work that we do sort of organically in the early learning space starts to become part of the K-12 vernacular and practice. And in many, many communities, we see those two things very separate. And I think if I just put my early learning hat on, I would say one of the things we could do that could really promote better relationship building, better family engagement with it, which is all connected to what we're talking about, is to bring those systems together and learn from each other and collaborate more. And I think when we see that happening, we just see really good things for kids all the way up through graduation.
You know,
Awesome.
if I could just add, Doug, if you don't mind, in California, as we are implementing universal transitional kindergarten through 2025-26, I'll say that my previous experience really demonstrates, Deborah, what you just said, particularly also for neurodiverse students, because we have integrated opportunities in preschool and in universal TK where there's collaborations between teachers, special educators, general educators to really think about how do we provide those opportunities early. And young people, they don't have any stigma around that, right? And so they learn very quickly to thrive in those situations. And we see much greater success in kindergarten when we do it that way.
Beautiful. We have come to about the end of our time. Do either of you have anything you want to add? Things that are on your mind? Before I turn it back over to the hosts?
I mean, just my gratitude for being here today and for this conversation and discussion with my colleagues. So really excited to hear about all the work that's been happening and looking forward to what we'll all continue to learn together.
I agree. I love when we do a webinar like this and I leave more filled than I came when we started. So thank you for the opportunity.
Awesome.
100%. I didn't leave. My camera is being weird, so I turned it off. But thank you so much. And this has just been a fantastic conversation.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Back to our sponsor. Welcome back.
Well, thank you. Thank you to all of you. This has been wonderful. Thanks to all of our panelists. Great discussion, great energy. Lots to think about. I do want to mention to our viewers that if you are interested in building those and learning more about how to build those strong, healthy relationships and foster a sense of belonging, you want to make sure you check out Harmony's online learning portal. We offer a no-cost Harmony curriculum for grades pre-K through grade 6 students. And then we also have Harmony professional learning modules for the adults who work with students in pre-K all the way up through high school. So be sure to check those out. Our resources support the whole child, and also we support the whole you. You can access that from either the QR code on the screen, or you can visit Harmony_Academy, or I'm sorry, harmony-academy.org. Ooh, I got a little ahead of myself there. There we go. On behalf of Dr. Fisher and our distinguished panelists, we'd like to thank you all for joining us, and we wish you a very pleasant rest of your day. Thanks for coming.